So before I launch into telling you what happened in today's committal hearing, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the Samantha Murphy Patrick Stephenson case for those of you who aren't familiar with it. If you want more information, there is actually a playlist on my channel where you can go and watch previous videos that I've done on this case. So this case is actually local to me, essentially. It occurred in Ballarat, which is in Victoria, in Australia. It's about an hour and a half from Bendigo, where I live. And what occurred is that Samantha Murphy, who was, I believe, 51 at the time, and Ballarat mum went out for a jog on the morning of the 4th of February and didn't come home. They are yet to find her remains, but they are, for some reason, they are confident that she is not alive. They made an arrest in March of a 22-year-old man called Patrick Stephenson. Now, there was a bit of a flap originally because when he was first arrested, there was actually a suppression order made which prevented the media from releasing his identity. This was because his family is quite well known, not just in the Ballarat area, but in Victoria, because his father is in fact a well-known former professional footballer. So there was initially this gag order. Of course, being Australia, the name had leaked out and people knew who it was pretty quickly anyway. The media actually challenged this order and the court released his identity. So then, of course, we were able to find out who he was, what his connections were, etc. So he was arrested in March of this year over Samantha's death. He has remained silent as to where her remains are. A few months back, they actually located her mobile phone in mud at the side of a dam. Now, if you're not familiar with Australia, over summer things dry out pretty quickly, so it is quite possible that that phone was underwater. But that through summer, with the heat, the sun, etc., evaporation probably meant that the size of the dam diminished rapidly, exposing the phone. They were actually able to dry the phone out and have apparently extracted data from that phone. So that will be quite interesting, I think, in the case. But despite that, they still have not found Samantha. So there was an initial committal hearing for Patrick on the 8th of August. However, this was then delayed till today because apparently there is a wealth of evidence to be gone through. So his lawyer requested roughly 12 weeks to go through the evidence, and the judge said, look, this is what I'm giving you. So that brings us to today and Patrick's latest appearance at the Ballarat Magistrates Court. So, of course, you've probably realised by now that I'm a day late in posting this. And basically, just comes down to there just not being enough hours in the day. So what I have done, the reason it's taken me longer to get this out is that I've gone through the entire transcript of the committal hearing that I created and basically written out notes. So this is not just snapshots of the committal hearing. This is basically the entire committal hearing. But as well as that, I've also done a bit of research into the different procedures that were cited and also into some of the witnesses that were mentioned. So basically I've done a bit of research into some of the things that were mentioned that were not clarified in court. So in terms of the courtroom, Patrick Stephenson was not present in the courtroom. He attended by video link, and I'll come back to that in a minute. In the courtroom, there wasn't a huge number of people there. Mick was present there. Mick is Samantha's husband. He was in a blue shirt and tie, and he looked like he was still suffering from so much grief. And I can imagine that because Samantha still hasn't been found. Of course, in terms of the people in the courtroom, we don't know if all of those were there for Patrick's hearing or if there were people there for subsequent cases, because if you are not familiar with Australian courts, magistrate courts basically deal with all the smaller matters or pre-trial stuff in the case of Red Rum. So in the magistrates court, one sitting will have multiple people who see the magistrate court that day. So after Patrick's case, there would have been several other cases that were dealt with in the same courtroom. Hence the reason I couldn't tell you how many of those people that were present in the courtroom were present for Patrick's case. That said, in terms of people attending by digital form, there was Patrick's mother and sister were present in the digital realm, along with some people from Mick's family, and I counted over 100 people present via the video link. Like I said, not necessarily all of them were there for Patrick, but I'm guessing there was quite a few there, because most of the time, you know, it's magistrates court. There's not a lot of reason for people other than accused to be present. So I would say that the large number of those 100 plus people were actually there for the trial. There was also a large number of media organisations that were present, most of whom were also present via digital link as opposed to being there in the courtroom, which, when you consider it these days, it is far more convenient. If you've got that digital link, you've got the camera, you've got the audio, it is just far more easier and less time consuming to actually attend that way. So Patrick, like I said, attended via video link from the Melbourne Assessment Prison. He kind of looked like the wild man from Borneo. He was wearing a white prison t-shirt, and since his last appearance, he's just become even more woolly, essentially. He has long, unkempt-looking hair and a really unkempt, fuzzy beard and moustache. Now, for my Australian listeners, just an observation on the side, which I guess made the judge sound far less scary than any judge ever should. To me, the judge sounded like Mark Mitchell. If you don't know who Mark Mitchell is, he is a well-known Australian comedian and actor. So the judge sounded kind of friendly. In terms of representation for Stephenson, his lawyer was a Mr. Allen. Now, I believe that Stephenson has actually procured a rather well-known defence lawyer. So no doubt he'll be pulling out the big guns when this all heads to the Supreme Court. Now, before everything started, the judge, in his very calm Mark Mitchell voice, gave a warning to everyone present in the courtroom and everyone attending via digital link. And that was that it is an offence under Victorian law to record, transmit or photograph any portion of the proceedings. Now, I can't remember if he did that up front last time, but I will just mention that there was an issue with a hot mic before the start of proceedings. So it's possible that it could have been in response to that. So what happened yesterday in the proceedings? So there were three things that were cited, and I will cover them in detail. So they referred to Section 143 of the Criminal Procedure Act, as well as Form 32 and Form 38. These forms were filed on the 7th and the 8th of November. Now, starting with Section 143 of the Criminal Procedure Act, this is from 2009 law in Victoria. This basically outlines the process for determining the committal proceedings when an accused chooses to stand trial. So in this case, it meant that Patrick Stephenson, along with his lawyer, decided that he would fast-track the trial and go straight to the Supreme Court as opposed to continuing with committal hearings in the Magistrate Court first before heading to trial. So it means that it's all going to go to trial much, much faster than it would had he chosen to continue through the Magistrate Court first. Now, in order for this to occur, so if they want to stand trial without these committal proceedings in the Magistrates Court, they have to fill out a Form 38, which is then filed with the court. And then there are procedures which must be followed by the judge before committing the accused to trial. I'm just going to go through a document from the Supreme Court of Victoria, or probably not all of it, which refers to fast-tracking hominy matters to the Supreme Court. You know that I can't say the full word because YouTube doesn't like it. So the introduction is probably worth hearing. Ordinarily, M and MS mortar charges against an accused undergo a committal process in the magistrates' courts before they're committed to stand trial in the Supreme Court. During the committal process, the prosecution is required to disclose material to the defence. There may be an opportunity to test some of the evidence through cross-examination of prosecution witnesses with the leave of the court. At the end of the committal hearing, the magistrate makes the decision whether or not to commit the accused to stand trial. So basically what has happened here is Patrick Stephenson has said he's going to waive all that, and it's just going to go straight to the Supreme Court to go to trial. This is partly to relieve pressure on the magistrate courts, but it also means that people can get to trial sooner. So, fast-tracking eligibility. Someone is eligible if they are charged with M or MS, or attempted M, or conspiracy to M, or incitement to M. So the accused, in this case Patrick Stephenson, can elect to stand trial pursuant to Section 143 of the Criminal Procedure Act. If there's more than one person involved, then all the co-accused have to actually consent to it being fast-tracked. That doesn't apply in this case. So once it's been fast-tracked to the Supreme Court, the matter is then managed by a judicial register. So that means that They have to follow up on any outstanding disclosure issues. They have to conduct any preparatory cross-examination of prosecution witnesses that may occur during the committal proceeding, and if necessary, organise a case conference. So, first of all, in terms of procedure, the accused must elect to stand trial, and this is when a Form 38 must be filed with the Magistrates Court saying that they have elected to do so. So when that is done, the magistrate will commit the accused to the Supreme Court in accordance with Section 144 of the CPA, the Criminal Practices Act. And I will read through that shortly. And it is a different process to going through the Magistrates Court. So the basis of fast-tracking a case is basically that the evidence is sufficient weight to support a conviction. So this possibly sounds bad for Patrick Stephenson. Now, there's a lot of other things here, a lot of details and stuff. I'm not sure if we really need to look at all these. There's a lot of yada yada kind of stuff. It does mention here a WebEx hearing booking form. So hopefully that means that it will actually be available on WebEx. That said, I am more than happy to travel down to Melbourne and actually sit in court if there isn't going to be a WebEx connection. There's a lot of other stuff that is covered in this document. I'll just scroll through it while I'm talking right now, because I'm sure that I think I've probably covered the most pertinent points with this that we need to worry about now. Essentially, Patrick Stephen has said that he is committing to go to trial and that he is ready for it to go to the Supreme Court, and all the other proceedings that would have occurred beforehand in the Magistrates Court are now put aside and it's fast-tracked, essentially. I think that's all we really need to know. So before all this can happen, there were the two forms that had to be filled out. First of all, you had the Form 32. So this is actually a case direction notice. So we'll just have a look at this. It's quite brief. So this must be filed with the Magistrates Court, and it has to check off a few boxes. So the accused's legal practitioner has read the brief of evidence. In other words, he needs to know what the case is against him. Also, the Director of Public Prosecutions or informant has read the brief of evidence. In other words, they need to know what the case is, including any evidence from the defence, of course. Then there has to have been a discussion between the accused and the Director of Public Prosecutions. Of course, that also means accused, in this case, can also mean the accused counsel, of course. So the discussion which occurs is whether this matter can be resolved by a plea of guilty, etc. And then they have to tick a box, either plea offer made by defendant or OPP, date plea offer made, plea offer rejected, accepted, issues which prevented the case from resolving. So there are things which need to be looked at before it can be looked at in terms of the 143 and being fast-tracked. And then you have the accused and the Director of Public Prosecution or Informant propose that this committal proceeding be dealt with as follows. Basically, that's when they agree to it going to the Supreme Court. And then we have your Form 38. So this was filled out on the 8th of November. And this is the form that needs to be filled out when the accused chooses to stand trial without a committal proceeding. So then the trial just goes straight to the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. Now there's also like 3 pages of documents here. So I will just go through briefly. I won't go through it all. Basically, this document, the court has to determine the committal proceeding at the committal mention meeting. This is when the accused has to commit for trial and enter a plea. We know that Patrick entered a plea of not guilty. Then there is your case conference, so that's your meetings between the lawyers from both sides. And then it says, accused will apply for a summary hearing of the following charges. Charge numbers, proposed plea. They also have to apply for leave to cross-examine any witnesses, and you've got a form that's got to be filled out there. They also have to provide evidence or information of previous convictions. So it's basically just all the paperwork that is preparing it to be fast-tracked to the Supreme Court. Now, this was interesting. There were 3 additional witness statements that were submitted to court during this hearing. 2 of them were connected with Victoria Police, so that was Gareth Shepherdson and Kyle Simpson. But the one that I found particularly interesting was the written statement or supplementary report from Dr. Matthew Sorrell. Who's he? He is one of Australia's foremost experts in digital forensic science. So according to his LinkedIn account, he specialises in digital forensic investigation, processing and analysis. Now, we know that Samantha's phone was found, and we were also told that it actually did turn on and they were able to extract data from that phone. So I think he's going to be a very, very important witness when the trial does actually go ahead. So, as per Section 143, the judge then committed Stephenson for trial in the Supreme Court. As part of that, under Section 143, before he could be committed to the Supreme Court, Stephenson had to enter a plea. He entered a plea of not guilty. Then there's a number of things which the judge has to actually read for the accused to ensure that all the boxes are ticked, basically. So this is actually under Section 144, and it basically says that this is what needs to be said. So as I've said, a plea needs to be entered. Patrick entered guilty. Then he's informed that his plea will be taken into account basically in the Supreme Court. So essentially that now has bearing on his sentencing when it reaches that point, basically. Then the judge actually cautioned Patrick that he needed to obtain legal representation, and that he has a right, if eligible, to get legal aid, but that it is basically up to him to organise that for himself. So that's his responsibility, and that he needs to make that application as soon as possible. Then he also explained the provisions for Section 190, which is alibi evidence. That means that written evidence needs to be given to the court or the Director of Public Prosecutions within 14 days of the end of the current proceeding. And within that, it has to have time and place of the alibi, the name of any witnesses to the alibi, and of course, contact details for such witnesses. So with all that set in place, then a directions hearing was set for the 27th of November at 9:30 in the Melbourne Supreme Court, and then Patrick Stephenson was essentially dismissed without bail, although he wasn't totally dismissed because then there was still his traffic infringements to deal with. Now, according to the judge, there were 20 media applications relating to the traffic charges, because those of you who have followed this case will probably be aware that they were sealed last time round. So those charge sheets were not made available to the media previously. Both sides agreed this time that the charge sheets would be made available to the media, subject, of course, to the standard redactions: address, phone number, vehicle registration, licence, etc. That matter has now been adjourned to the 2nd of December for further mention, so it's still not actually being tried. And of course that will be in the Magistrates Court in Ballarat, because it is a lesser matter. So at this point in time, he's not entered any plea for that. Now, there was a bit of confusion at the end of all this, because the judge said that the media had put in an application to access documents, charges and summary photos and CCTV footage and statements as tendered to the court. It seemed like nobody actually knew who had actually submitted them. So I'm not sure what the story is with that. It was all a little bit confusing. I don't think even the judge had a clue as to what the story was there. But that application was dismissed by the judge for the simple reason that once the case had been set as being fast-tracked and going to the Supreme Court, all that stuff now comes under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court. So the media will now have to make a new application to the Supreme Court for those things. Now, before they even got to that, there was this really long delay because one of the prosecuting lawyers had already taken off and they couldn't track him down. Eventually, someone from his office had done an email saying, yeah, they agree that since it all came under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, that basically in order to safeguard a fair trial, then the new application would have to go through the Supreme Court and be decided by them. They now have management in full over Patrick's case. So, thankfully, a few places have reported on the traffic charges without putting a paywall over it. It seems like the biggest issue with Australian media is that if it's not done on YouTube or, regular news reporting video, if it's your standard newspaper reporting, then there's a good chance that it's being hidden behind a paywall. And the only way you can access it is if you agree to subscribe on a monthly basis. And I refuse to do that. I will just keep searching till I find the information from another source. So, the traffic charges. He has 5 charges against him, which relate to careless driving, drink driving, and drug driving offences. And this is apparently following a single vehicle collision involving a motorcycle in Ballarat in October of last year. Now, the significant thing that came out, and I think this could have some bearing also on his Red Rum case, is that he had MDMA in his system, which is also known as Molly, also known as ecstasy. So, one of the things that can occur when someone takes Molly is that they can have a change of temperament. They can become angry. They can also have hallucinations. So, we don't know if he was on any drugs when he did whatever he did to Samantha. But certainly, with this as a prior record, it certainly puts the case in a new light. There has been a lot of speculation about that in the first place, because there had been stories coming out about him being a bit of a party animal and indulging in these sorts of things. So, knowing that there are actually charges against him that include drug charges, this definitely gives some indication of possibly where the trial may be headed in the Supreme Court. So that's my summary of where things were at yesterday with the Patrick Stephenson trial. As mentioned, I will be either heading down to Melbourne or following it again digitally. I'll also, if it is being put on WebEx, I'll also check out these driving charges on the 2nd of December. I think that's about all I can offer you for today. So, thanks for listening. If you're new, please subscribe. Also, please hit like, and definitely please do leave some comments below. With this being a less well-known case, the chances of this video getting out into the algorithm are actually pretty low. So you can help me with that by leaving a comment below. So thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next one.